things,
Right.
you know, and also the lack of funds for public services and education is something that's not being caused by immigrants.
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of cost control as far as, you know, agricultural product and so forth, because the truth of the matter is that most of these people that are complaining about their jobs being taken away would not want the jobs that are being done by people that they consider immigrants. And you know, and one of the things that I want to add is, as far as immigration myths and so forth, is that, you know, as Native American people, you know, if you are not Native American, you are an immigrant to this country. So I think a lot of the complaining that we're hearing is from people who themselves and their families are immigrants.
Well, and I do want to address that because a lot of, even though most of the fears around immigration, I think, are founded on people's mostly, you know, founded on people's anxiety about their own well-being. Education. Yeah, and a lack of information.
Right.
There is an element of the anti-immigrant movement that's based on racism, really, and there are proven links to white supremacist organizations.
Well, we, you know, actually within this TV studio that we have here, that we film our show, we have an organization called CAPS, which is the California's Against, I think it's something about population stabilization, and they're actually an organization who produces a show called Crowdification. But that is where they're coming from, is the idea of non-immigration, and them themselves all being immigrants.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I actually went to Ellis Island in New York, and they have a National Immigration Museum, and you can see all the different waves of immigration that have come into this country, and there is a sort of lack of historical perspective.
Right.
But also, it is very interesting because the concept of migration and immigration relies on ideas of nations that are, you know, that haven't always been there. The border with Mexico or with any other country hasn't always been there. It was created. Indigenous people were on this continent before, and it's interesting because even here in Santa Barbara County, we have an indigenous group that comes from Mexico, from a state in Mexico called Oaxaca, and they're the Mixtecos.
Yes.
And they are an indigenous community that is marginalized, not only within American culture, but also within Mexican culture, because they're not assimilated. They don't speak
They still are
Spanish.
Tribal people, right?
Right, and they have different customs, different, even different ways of relating to one another.
Right.
And so that's something that they face a lot of discrimination for in the community, but I do think it is ironic how you're right. People who were in this continent and who are being actually displaced from their native lands because of global trade policies, including American influences, are now being sort of blamed and and alienated.
Right. Yeah, and you know, and just to mention too is that, you know, the land that we call the United States, which is now the occupied territories of our indigenous nations. When we were, we had the newcomers, or whatever you want to call them. Their idea was the United States was based on the idea of immigration. That's their American dream, is to come here and have a home and have a business and they brought their families from Europe and so forth.
Well, they were being persecuted, so they came here because they...
And some of these people are experiencing the same thing. They want to come here and you know, again, have a way to make money for their family and provide an income for their family and an education and so forth.
Yeah, and you know, I also wanted to point out that the Mexican experience is not the only experience there is. There's also a lot of Central American immigrants.
Right, and you hear a lot when you're talking to people about immigration. A lot of times people are just referred to as Mexicans.
Right.
And that's about a very small population.
And that's another misconception,
Yes.
because even though Mexicans are the largest group of immigrants, there are, for example, Central American and to a lesser degree South American,
and they are really they're running. They're here because of persecution themselves in their own countries.
Absolutely. For Central American people in particular, there's been huge emigration, people leaving the country because of civil wars in Guatemala, El Salvador, and a lot of those have actually been influenced by the U.S. and U.S. policy
and U.S. supplying the weapons that are being used within these wars,
and even in intervention, and there's been a lot of deaths and people being displaced and having to leave because their own home is not safe.
Right.
So a lot of people are here, and they're not, you know, they're not being allowed to stay. So.
Right.
So that's why we need immigration reform. And Pueblo is going to be having an event on May Day, which is International Workers' Day, featuring local elected officials talking about what's happening with immigration reform and trying to get a commitment from them and from the community too.
So can you quickly give us some contact information for that? People want to be involved and you know, be supportive, whether it's money or participation.
Yeah, well, we definitely welcome and appreciate the community support in any form, whether it's your time, your monetary contributions, or whatever skills you might have. And you can contact us at 882-2484 or email me at joel.frf@gmail.com.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for sharing your information, and you know, we're getting this out there in the community. You know, just to let people know what some of the immigration struggles and stuff that are happening to immigration families here. But thank you.